When asked about which commandment is the greatest, Jesus in his reply summarized to us the essence of the Ten Commandments in two major commands: to love God and to love our neighbor. And in Jesus' exact words, you shall love your God with all your heart, with all your soul, and with all your mind. This is the greatest and the first commandment. The second is like it. You shall love your neighbor as yourself. The whole law and the prophets depend on these two commandments. That's from Matthew chapter 22, verses 36 to 40. So it's good to be reminded time and again what the commandments are and what they are all about. The first three commandments, which we've just finished last week, are all about our duty to love God. The fourth through the 10th commandment are all about our duty to love our neighbor. Just as the first commandment is the foundation of the first table of the law to love God, the fourth commandment is the foundation of the second table of the law to love our neighbor. So, can we do that? That is slide number 1. Our lesson for this evening is on the fourth commandment, which is honor your father and your mother. It sounds like a very simple command, but actually the scope of it is much farther and more in-depth than we all know. So here it is. The fourth commandment opens the second table of the Decalogue. It shows the order of charity. God has willed that after him, so he's number 1, we should honor our parents, number 2, whom we owe our life and who have handed unto us the knowledge of God. We are obliged to honor and respect, number 3, all those whom God, for our good, has vested with his authority. That's from the Catechism of the Catholic Church, paragraph 2197. And the fourth commandment further includes instructors, teachers, leaders, magistrates, those who govern, all who exercise authority over others or over a community of persons. So in other words, these are also the other people in our lives who we owe some honor to. So the second table of the law, starting with the fourth commandment, therefore is about relationships. Relationships within our family and everyone else, including the institutions established by men, such as our local and state government, as well as the relationship of nations with other nations. So that's why it's a whole gamut of social morality and love of neighbors. So slide number 3, please. Fundamental relationships. The focus of this evening's lesson is about relationships, like I mentioned. There are 4 natural relationships that persist in all times, places, cultures, and political systems. And these are the relations between parents and children, husbands and wives, rulers and citizens, masters and servants, or employers and employees. The authority of parents, husbands, rulers, and masters is not one thing, but 4 very different things in both nature and extent. In reality, rulers' authority over citizens cannot be expected to be based on unselfish Christ-like love. So in the process, you'll see that there's a difference in authority in the first section and authority definition of authority in the second part of this lesson. So, and we will briefly examine each of these relationships. In any of these relationships, there are 2 operational concepts, or what they call the essence of fundamental relationships. And these are authority and obedience. So next slide, please. Authority. It's the right to be obeyed based on obeying God, the source of all authority. God himself is the source of all authority, and only the authority of God is absolute and unchangeable. Having authority over someone always presupposes being under a higher authority and transmitting it faithfully, as the church transmits the gospel of Christ. The church has no authority to invent or change what she has received from God. An example from the Bible, remember the centurion in Luke's gospel. The centurion knew that his authority is derived from his obedience to Caesar. And he knew that Christ's authority is derived from Christ's obedience to the Father. Christ had authority over demons and diseases because he could truly say, I have come down from heaven not to do my own will, but the will of him who sent me. Obedience. This is the willingness to submit to authority. Obedience is not a mark of inferiority. No one has obeyed the Father's will more completely than Christ. Yet Christ was divine, equal to the Father in all things. Therefore, when the fourth commandment commands children to obey their parents, and when the New Testament tells wives to obey their husbands, the citizens to obey their rulers, and servants to obey their masters, this does not imply an inferior-superior relationship. Authority does not contradict equality, which we just pointed out a while ago. Jesus Christ, although he's equal to the Father in all things, still submitted to the Father's authority and was obedient to the Father's will. Nor does equality eliminate authority. Let's come down to earth. For example, at work, all of you have the same qualification in that department, and all of you are bright, intelligent, etc. It does not mean that there cannot be anybody above you. So equality does not eliminate authority. Scripture repeatedly affirms authority and commands obedience. Authority has often been confused with power, and obedience with inferiority, weakness, or servility. This misunderstanding comes from using the world's point of view instead of God's. Okay? The world treasures power. God treasures goodness. Authority in the biblical sense is not a power word, but a goodness word. It means right, not might. So we'll now go to the next slide where we'll talk about the family in God's plan. So the first relationship that one establishes after birth is with one's family. Family relationship is important for a person in every stage of his life. When life gets hard and starts to grip away from your control, the kind words of your mother, your siblings, your spouse come down your soul and gives you the strength and courage to take life head on. The importance of family, its characteristics, and ways to build a strong relationship with family members cannot be overemphasized. The family is God's design, and no man can change this fact because no man invented it. So it's designed by God prior to the Sagan origin and cannot be reinvented. Paragraph 2202 in the Catechism says, a man and a woman united in marriage, together with their children, form a family. This institution is prior to any recognition by public authority, which has an obligation to recognize it. Okay, so if we go to the next slide, please. Again, in creating man and woman, God instituted the human family, endowed it with its fundamental constitution. We have to keep that in mind. Its members are persons who are equal in dignity. Again, the equality is set up there. For the common good of its members and of society, the family necessarily has manifold responsibilities, rights, and duties. Okay, before we go to that, I will deviate a little bit. Let's talk about secularists, or those who favor worldly and temporal concerns and who ignore God and his authority, almost always ignore the family, its authority and its priority over the state. Secularists naturally tend to overestimate states and underestimate families because states are made by man and made in many different forms, while the family is designed by God alone, not man, and cannot be essentially redesigned in different forms. Currently, though, most secularists today, they often attempt to do just that, to redesign the family. For example, by declaring that the artificial, temporary, and sterile union between two or more homosexuals to be a family, and giving it as much importance as the natural, permanent, procreative union of husband and wife. So for us, that cannot be a family based on our teachings of the Catholic Church. Slide 7, please. The family is the original cell of social life, CC 2207. Authority, stability, and a life of relationships within the family constitute the foundations of freedom, security, and fraternity within society. The family is the community in which, from childhood, one can learn moral values, begin to honor God, and make good use of freedom. Family life is an initiation into life in society. Very important. Again, to underscore that, the family is prior to the state in origin and therefore in rights. We keep mentioning state because later on we're going to talk about the relationship uh, involving the state. The state did not invent the family nor give it its constitution and its rights. Therefore, the state has no authority to uninvent or reinvent it. The family is prior to any recognition by public authority, which has the obligation to recognize it. In other words, it's the public authority, civil authorities, has to recognize the family and the needs of the family. The family does not hold its rights from the state, but from God, since it holds its existence and its fundamental constitution from God. It is the state that has duties towards the family. The state must foster the good of families and individuals and not vice versa. So the family is prior to the state in importance and is the first and the foundational building block of all society. The next slide, please. So, saying here, the family must be helped and defended by appropriate social measures. Where families cannot fulfill their responsibilities, other social bodies have the duty of helping them and of supporting the institution of the family. I worked with Catholic Charities for about 12 years. And Catholic Charities, one of our biggest programs is a food distribution center. Every week, or 4 days a week, we distribute about 500 bags of food a day. When the pandemic hit, this doubled to about 1,000 food bags per day, or about 5,000 food bags a week, given not only to the poor, but to people who have lost their jobs during the pandemic. So in addition, Catholic Charities has a CalFresh application program, formerly known as food stamps, wherein we help people apply for CalFresh benefits to help people put food on their families' tables. Catholic Charities is one of the many social bodies being referred to in this paragraph, okay? And I'm sure you know a lot more. Now, following the principle of subsidiarity, larger communities should take care not to usurp the family's prerogatives or interfere in its life. We're gonna go back to the principle of subsidiarity, which is gonna be repeated again at a later time. So, let's continue now to the next slide, please. The relationship between husband and wife. Within the family, husband and wife, we're going to see how the authority and obedience come into play. Okay, so love is the only scriptural basis for a husband's authority over his wife, and it's also expected of parents toward children. While wives are told to be subject to their husbands, husbands are also told to be subject to their wives. Be subject to one another, or in the wordings there, be subordinate to one another out of reverence for Christ. Husbands must love their wives as Christ loved the church. So Paul is saying that the husband is the head, but being the head is not the same as being the boss. So God designed these human relationships to be between equals, playing different roles, not a power struggle between unequals for the same top role. In his letter to the Ephesians, which you have there on the screen, it is not Paul who, in the name of God, demands that the wife be submissive. It is the society at that time that required it. In our present time, the civilized world has recognized the equality of man and woman. Each couple should find its own balance and take initiative according to the natural authority and the capacity of each one. In any case, whether one partner makes a decision, or follows it, neither will feel superior or inferior. You've all heard this joke. In the family, the husband is the head, but the wife is the neck. So she's an important role. Okay, we stated earlier that in any relationship, there are duties and responsibilities involved. We will now talk about parent-child relationship. Parents have the authority over their children, and authority always entails responsibilities. So what are these? The duties of parents. We've outlined here about 6 of them. We're going to read through them first, and then I'll discuss a little bit each one of them a little bit later. Number 1 is to educate their children. This includes the essential duty to guide them in the ways of the Lord. You can find that in paragraphs 22, 21, 22, 23, 24, 25, and 26 in the Catechism, which explains it further. Number 2 is to respect and love their children, being fully committed to them for open communication and spending time with them. Third is to create a home, and included there is disciplining but not provoking their children. Next is to evangelize children, and then next is to provide for children's physical and spiritual needs, advise them, but avoid undue pressure regarding choice of spouse or profession. We've all been parents, so we're all very familiar with this. But like I said, it still helps to be reminded time and again, what these are. So parents must educate their children about charity or agape, which is life's most important lesson, the love that is the very nature of God. For this reason, the home is called a domestic church. It is the place where children discover that this charity, and therefore this God, exists by our parents mediating God's reality, which is charity to us. The role of parents in the education of children is of such importance that it's almost impossible to provide an adequate substitute. Okay, to respect their children. Parents must regard their children as children of God and respect and love them as human persons, showing themselves, meaning parents, obedient to the will of the Father in heaven. They educate their children to fulfill God's laws. So each child is hungry for affection. Parents must show their children that they are loved equally and unlimitedly, whether weak or strong, healthy or ill, normal or handicapped, and that they are valuable because they are loved, rather than loved because they are valuable. To create a home, let's go to slide number 11, and so that'll be more explicit. Paragraph 20 to 23. Parents have first responsibility for the education of their children. They bear witness to this responsibility first by creating a home where tenderness, forgiveness, respect, fidelity, and disinterested service are the rule. The home is well suited for education in the virtues. This requires an apprenticeship in self-denial, sound judgment, and self-mastery, the preconditions of all true freedom. Parents should teach their children to subordinate the material and instinctual dimensions to interior and spiritual ones. Parents have a grave responsibility to give good example to their children, and by knowing how to acknowledge their own failings to their children, parents will be better able to guide and correct them. So it gives you the definition of a home and what a home should be. Okay, the next slide, please. The right and duty of parents to educate their children are primordial and inalienable. So we already mentioned that a little bit. I just want to focus on 22-25. Parents should evangelize their children and initiate them at an early age into the mysteries of faith. Okay. And then to repeat, parents have a grave responsibility to give a good example to their children. This is by far the most effective way to teach morality and religion. Okay, to again digress a little bit about that. A few days ago, I watched the Word and Fire show. Some of you are familiar with that, which regularly features Bishop Robert Barron. The topic was on how to bring young people to actively participate in the church, and how to bring back those young people who have strayed away from the church. It was pointed out that most of the time, what we say is, well, what's the church doing about this? So that's decidedly putting the responsibility on the church. The co-host cited a study made on this subject, showing results which indicated that Actually, the biggest factor or influence on children or young people to make this happen, the church involvement, coming or leaving the church, is their parents. It's not the church. So while the church has an important role in this process, it is the parents' good influence, good example, that has the strongest influence in young people's lives when it comes to a life of active involvement or participation in the church. Okay, next slide, please. Now, what are the duties of children? Well, I'll just complete the others, but we already talked about that. Providing physical and spiritual needs, advising but avoiding undue pressure. That's the latter part of the duties of parents. So we're now on the duties of children. It's the children's duties to respect and obey their parents. Respect. Children must respect and honor their parents. The respect of children, whether minor or adults, for their father and mother, is nourished by the natural affection born of the bond between them, required by God's commandments. 22:14. We owe our parents respect and gratitude. Children should have gratitude to their parents for bringing them into the world and nurturing them to life. Filial respect is shown by true docility and obedience. Obedience. As long as the child lives at home with their parents, the child should obey his or her parents in all that they ask of him, if it's for the good of the family. Obedience toward parents ceases, or they no longer need to obey parents, when they leave home. They are emancipated. But respecting parents is always owed to them. Respect for parents is always owed to them. Okay, so paragraph 22:16 says, this is from the Bible, my son, keep your father's commandment, forsake not your mother's teaching. When you walk, they will lead you. When you lie down, they will watch over you. And when you awake, they will talk to you. So a wise son hears his father's instruction, but a scoffer does not listen to rebuke. So the next slide, please. Continuing duties of parents, duties of children to support their parents. There are several paragraphs on there. To support them in situations of distress, sickness, loneliness, or old age. The fourth commandment reminds grown children of their responsibilities towards their parents. As much as they can, they must give them maternal, material, and moral support in old age and in times of illness, loneliness, and distress. All of us have gone through this, being the sandwich generation, you have raising up your kids, you're taking care of your parents. So this is very important. This is this slide 14? Do we have slide 14? Susan, is this slide 14? Okay, so let me add to this. The fourth commandment reminds grown children of their responsibilities towards their parents. I would like to share, okay, that's fine, we'll keep it there for now. I'd like to share a recent experience related to this topic. But first, let me give you a brief background of my story. After my commitment to our book project on apologetics, I'll be working on another book project. This is biography of a friend. I will call my friend Gina, but that's not her real name. So anyway, last week, I had dinner with Gina and her mom. I told Gina I wanted to interview her nanay before nanay goes home to the Philippines for good, after having stayed with Gina for more than 20 years in Yoblenda. Actually, nanay left last Saturday, and so she's now back in their hometown in Bulacan. Gina's nanay is 93 years old. Such a sweet and wonderful person to talk to and to be with. So after we talked about Gina's childhood and other family matters that I felt are relevant to the forthcoming book project, I asked nanay, what is the one single most important thing you would like people to know about your daughter? And she said, my daughter knew how to take care of her family well, raised her children well, and knew how to care for her parents well. Well, she actually said it in Tagalog. Sabi niya, yung anak ko, magaling yung mag-alaga ng pamilya niya. Magaling magpalaki ng magaling ang pagpalaki ng mga anak niya, at marunong siyang mag-alaga ng kanyang magulang. So, Gina is a devout Catholic and has great faith in God. I consider her a successful person in her personal and spiritual life, as well as in her career and financial endeavors. So her mother's comments didn't come as a surprise to me. But it struck a real familiar chord in me, because that was the time, that was last Thursday, as a matter of fact. I was preparing for this presentation on the fourth commandment. So Gina is the embodiment of two things: a parent doing her duties to her children and her family, as well as a child or a daughter doing her duties to her parents. And it's amazing to hear those exact words being articulated by a mother extolling these as virtues of her obedient daughter. So I really felt I have to share that with you. Okay. Elderly, talk a little bit more about elderly parents. Elder people tend to need greater affection. We know that, right? This affection should be genuine and not given only for the sake of consoling. It should be capable of overcoming resistance. It should be an experience of love for life, however it manifests itself, even in sickness and suffering. This affection should spring from the inversion of roles, by which children become the parents of their own parents and return the attention, love, and care that they themselves receive, even if they don't think they receive these. So the plague of old age, like dementia and Alzheimer's, can render parents very helpless and most needy. Parents afflicted with these dementia or Alzheimer's in their old age need their children's affection, understanding, and support the most. Okay, let's go to the next slide. The relationship between citizens and rulers. Okay, mark here now the definition of authority. But first of all, the basic premise on paragraph 1899. The authority required by the moral order derives from God. Let every person be subject to the governing authorities, for there is no authority except from God, and those that exist have been instituted by God. Basic. Second paragraph. By authority, one means the quality by virtue of which persons or institutions make laws and give orders to men and expect obedience from them. The duty of obedience requires all to give due honor to authority and to treat those who are of charge, to exercise it with respect and insofar as it's deserved, with gratitude and goodwill. Paragraph 1990. And then to continue, authority does not derive its moral legitimacy from itself. It must not behave in a despotic manner, but must act for the common good as a moral force based on freedom and a sense of responsibility. The key word here is common good. Authority is exercised legitimately only when it seeks the common good, there it is again, for the group concerned, and it employs morally licit means to attain it. So we're gonna be talking about the common good again later. So now we're gonna talk about the duties of the state and civil. After having that definition, let's go to the duties of the state or the civil authorities in the next slide, please. Here they are. Duties of the state and civil authorities. Number one, to exercise authority as service. Whoever would be great among you must be your servant. That's why those who hold positions in public office are called public servants. Serving their constituents is their primary task and responsibility. Authority is viewed as a right, not might. Second is to facilitate the exercise of freedom and responsibility by all. And how do they do that? Practice distributive justice, maintain harmony and peace. That's the only way citizens can exercise freedom and responsibility. And most important is to respect the fundamental rights of the human person. And then fifth is to exercise political rights for the common good of the human community. Okay, the common good. To achieve common good, those in authority or public authorities should ensure that the following are observed: respect for the person, we pointed that out, fostering the social well-being and development of the group, maintenance of peace, or the stability and security of a just order. So it is the role of the state to defend and promote the common good of civil society, its citizens, and immediate bodies. Okay, how about citizens towards the rulers and authorities? What are their duties and responsibilities? So next slide, please. The duties of citizens: obedience to lawful authorities unless contrary to God's law. That's in paragraph 2242. To pay taxes, fulfill their roles in the life of the political community, and to defend one's country. Obedience to God. Again, God's fourth commandment enjoins us to honor all those who, for our good, have received authority in society from God. That's CC 2234. This does not mean that there is a divine right of kings or of any other particular government or forms of government. It simply means that God designed man as a social and political creature, and therefore, in obeying legitimate and social authorities, we are obeying God's design. We are told to be subject for the Lord's sake to every human institution, because when you do that, there's peace. Slide 18, please. But we should obey God rather than men. CC 2242 says that the citizen is obliged in conscience not to follow the directives, not to follow the directives of civil authorities when they are contrary to the demands, excuse me, of the moral order. To the fundamental rights of persons, or the teachings of the gospel. Refusing obedience to civil authorities when their demands are contrary to those of an upright conscience finds its justification in the distinction between serving God and serving the political community. Render to Caesar things that are Caesar's, and to God the things that are God's. So we must obey God rather than men. We can go to the next slide. Duties and responsibilities of nations. Again, number one, to function for the common good of persons. Common good. Always oriented towards the progress of persons. The order of things must be subordinate to the order of persons and not the other way around. Number two, to welcome foreigners. The more prosperous nations are obliged, to the extent that they're able to welcome foreigners in search of the security and means of livelihood which he cannot find in his country of origin. Avoid excessive intervention. Again, here we go. The teaching of the church has elaborated the principle of subsidiarity, according to which a community of a higher order should not interfere in the internal life of community of a lower order, depriving the latter of its functions, but rather should support it in case of need and help to coordinate its activity with activities of the rest of the society, as well as to aid poor nations. I'm running out of steam here. My cough is still catching up with me, but we'll continue. Those are the duties of nations. I wanted to elaborate a little bit, but you know about welcoming foreigners. The United States in the 1970s, again, during my time with Catholic Charities, or before my time with Catholic Charities, right after the Vietnam War, Catholic Charities is processing thousands of applications for Vietnamese refugees. After the Middle Eastern War, the war in the Middle East, Afghanistan, people from Afghanistan, Pakistan, we were processing paperwork for these people, welcoming the foreigners. And then lately now, Ukrainians, I'm sure we will be seeing that pretty soon. But it's our duty to welcome foreigners because we can do it, okay, as a nation. Now, before slide 2. Okay, the last part of my presentation. At the beginning of the study notes, we mentioned that the second table of law started with the fourth commandment, which is about relationships. Relationship within our family and everyone else, including the institutions established by men. We already talked about relationship between parents and children, husband and wives, etc., etc., and then institutions, state, and nations. The following discussion is going to focus about everyone else. The following discussion on friendship will address the everyone else part. So my first slide here is a quote from John chapter 15, verse 14. You are my friends if you do whatever I command you. Friendship is another social relationship that we're almost familiar with and is worthy of discussion in this section. So information abounds on what friendship is, the meaning of friendship, what a true friend is, and how to be a true friend. An article entitled True Friendship was published online on May 7, 2021 by Catholic Daily Reflections, which is also available on YouTube, which is what we're going to see now. This reflection serves as I felt, a relevant treatise on friendship in the context of our lesson on relationship. It talks about our friendship with God, first and foremost, and secondly, our relationship or friendship with others. So Sister Gurley will click and take us to that video.
This is Catholic Daily Reflections for Friday of the 5th week of Easter. Today's reflection is entitled True Friendship. You are my friends if you do what I command you. I no longer call you slaves because a slave does not know what his master is doing. I have called you friends because I have told you everything I have heard from my Father. To some, Jesus' definition of friendship may at first glance seem odd. He says that we are his friends only when we do what he commands us to do. Imagine saying that to one of your best friends. Such a statement would most likely be met with a laugh and dismissal as foolishness. So is true friendship always based on obedience? Obviously, the expectation that your friends obey you so as to win your friendship is not the basis of any authentic friendship. Jesus is the only one who can base your friendship upon obedience to his holy will. Why? Because of the nature of what he commands you to do. Jesus is pure truth. What he wills is the perfection of love. Therefore, his statement that you are only his friend if you do what he commands you to do teaches that friendship is based on the truth. It's based on love, goodness, kindness, selfless sacrifice, and self-giving. And it is all of these truths that Jesus commands us to do. Therefore, Jesus is essentially telling us that his will alone provides the pathway to the friendship we desire to have with him. In regard to your friendship with others, each true friendship can only be based on that which God wills for friends. And in that sense, you can command the will of God for your friendships. This means you are only willing to establish a friendship upon the truth. It means you are only willing to share a relationship based upon selfless, sacrificial, self-giving mercy, compassion, honesty, and love. Reflect today upon your understanding of friendship. Begin with your friendship with God, but then also ponder your friendship with others. Do you love our Lord in the way that He commands? And as you ponder your friendship with others, examine whether or not each friendship also conforms to obedience to the will of God. If you can love God and others in conformity with the dictates of true love, then your friendships will produce an eternity of deep fulfillment.
Okay.
Let us.
Okay. Am I back on? Okay. This video talks about what I'll call the morality of friendship, and tells us that our relationship with friends should be based on the truth, namely Jesus and his teachings. It should be based upon selfless, sacrificial, self-giving, mercy, compassion, and love, not on convenience, the usefulness of the other person, or any other selfish reasons. And the essence of true friendship is seeking another person's highest good. Okay, again, passages about friendship abound in the Bible. Consider two more passages from Proverbs. Proverbs 17, verse 17 says here, "He who is a friend is always a friend, and a brother is born for a time of adversity." Another translation of the same passage, "A friend is always loyal, and a brother is born to help him in time of need." Okay. Then Proverbs 18, verse 24. "Some friends bring ruin to us, but a true friend is more loyal than a brother." Another translation of the same verse, "One who has unreliable friends soon comes to ruin. A real friend sticks closer than a brother." So note that the filial relationship, brother, is mentioned in both passages from Proverbs. This underscores how strong a relationship, friendship can be, which can be raised to the level of an almost natural relationship. So, friends are people who make it easier for us to live the gospel of Jesus Christ. In this sense, seeking another person's highest good is the essence of true friendship. I mentioned that earlier. It is putting someone else first. Relationships. It is being strictly honest, loyal, and chaste in every action. And it doesn't hurt either if we see it as our duty or obligation to evangelize our friends. As they say in the Cursillo, make a friend, be a friend, and bring your friend to Christ. Sorry, I have to plug that in. End the presentation. Thank you. We'll now go to the next slide about the